Mr. Trump's Board of Peace announcement comes a day after he backed away from threats to slap tariffs on European nations that opposed his plan to acquire Greenland. The U.S. leader says Washington is exploring a potential deal on the Arctic island following talks with NATO. Mr. Trump addressed the World Economic Forum yesterday and ruled out the use of military force to take over the island.
We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force, where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force.
NATO Chief Mark Rutte reiterating today that discussions with the U.S. leader on a framework deal included keeping the Arctic region safe. He adds that talks down the line would ensure that China and Russia will not gain access to the Danish autonomous territory. Denmark's Prime Minister says her country will keep engaging in constructive Arctic security talks along with Greenland, but insists it must respect the nation's territorial integrity. Let's stay on the topic, get more insights now. We're joined by Nick Redman, Editor-in-Chief and Director of Analysis at Dow Jones Oxford Analytica. Now, he joins us from the World Economic Forum in Davos. Nick, welcome to you. Now, we heard there the US appearing to be floating the idea of a deal versus an outright purchase of Greenland. He's also saying, I'll lift tariffs on Europe. So it's being framed as a Washington climb down, or could it simply be a different route to the same objective?
I think it's a really interesting question, because as far as we can tell, and details are still coming in, but the solution that they're talking about on military bases, on mineral rights, is something that's been on the table really for months up to now. And it's a long, long way short of this purchase agreement, the outright United States possession of Greenland that Trump was insisting on as recently as 48 hours ago. So we're going to have to see exactly what rolls out of this. But evidently the European reaction to this already is this is so far short of what Trump wanted that we are cautious about whether this is actually going to be a deal that's got over the line. And we still don't know exactly the extent to which the Rutte plan is completely in line with what the Danes and the Greenlanders want.
All right, so the devil in the details to come, but when you just pull up a map of the world, look at how close Greenland is to the US, to Canada, and we also see how far it is from Denmark. Is what Trump proposing strategically all that unrealistic?
Well, it's the legality of it. So, point that I struggle to work out whether the United States government was aware of it or not, whether the president was aware of it or not. But a European country cannot sell off its territory and its own people. And Denmark has had sovereignty over Greenland for a very long time. If Greenland ultimately wishes to move towards independence, that route is there. Denmark is not going to block that. But European prime ministers tend to be the custodians of their country. And it's just not within Mette Frederiksen's gift to sell off 57,000 of our own citizens. And that was the problem that the Danes were facing from the start. And that's something that apparently this agreement has got around, because it's not really touched on the sovereignty question. And President Trump's desires, particularly regarding military bases, also on minerals, seem to be something that can be accommodated. But, to go back to it, this is a long way short in terms of what we can understand of this deal so far from what he was asking for at the weekend.
Now, the European leaders are saying Greenland isn't for sale, as we've heard. There was talk about using some form of cultural pressure, boycotting FIFA World Cup, for example, which is being held in the US. What leverage do they really have to stop further US pressure?
Well, actually, the Europeans did have quite serious pressure. Last July, they approved a packet of sanctions in response to the Trump administration's initial tariffs, if you remember, after those Liberation Day tariffs on April the 2nd, where he announced many countries in the world had new rates. So that was approved. It was then suspended. The suspension is just about to come up. So the EU could actually quite quickly turn on those tariffs. In addition to that, the truce that the United States and the European Union agreed in July was for the United States to have tariff-free access to European markets and for higher US tariffs to be placed on European goods. That was due to be ratified on the 26th of January. The Europeans postponed that. So actually, the calendar worked in Europe's favor on this one because they could credibly threaten fairly immediate response to the 10% tariffs on 6 EU members that Trump was threatening. I think, moreover, just the fact that the Trump administration came in so hard, went so strong on this, wasn't seen to be willing to compromise in ways that European states usually are willing to compromise, and that they've had an expectation over decades that the United States would also adopt a similarly compromising position. It's really shocked them. And I think we've long had a problem of the European Union being quite slow, quite ponderous. The difficulty is always getting so many member states to walk a common line. But Trump's threats, I think, have had something of a catalyzing effect. And one of the things that I think is going to come out of this is, even if this deal over Greenland actually holds, the EU is going to show interest now in building up its retaliatory capacity in the trade sphere, because it knows that that's where it has some strength.
Okay, so one of the memorable responses to, as you said, Trump's comments has been Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney. He made some strong remarks at Davos, saying that middle part countries must band together in a time of political and diplomatic rupture. Now, we're going to play that soundbite for you.
Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited.
So, Nick, how can middle powers like Canada navigate, what they're characterizing as very dramatic, very radical political shifts without, as he said, ending up on the menu of bigger powers?
Well, as he said, they have to come to the table together. Carney laid out quite a clear vision that states such as Canada, middle powers, actually have got the potential to build up their own strength. And so they're better able to operate and look after themselves in the world. But the real revolutionary part in his speech was that middle powers should band together and that through this unity, they could have strength. And I have a feeling that when we look at the US climb down, which I think had multiple drivers, one of them would be the idea, which I think will resonate with Donald Trump and his idea of bargaining leverage and state power, is the ideas of a group of middle powers actually coming together and achieving an amount of leverage that could be almost equivalent to one of the great powers. That's probably something that stops him in his tracks. Of course, it's a very easy thing for Mark Carney to say and a very difficult thing for these middle powers to actually put into practice. But if they do, given the agenda that Carney was pushing out, including sort of respect for international law, going back to many of the aspects of the rules-based order, which he admitted was imperfectly imposed, I think that's something that could actually have a bandwagoning effect. I think there are lots of smaller states, particularly in your part of the world, other parts of the world, that would be quite interested in working with an effective coalition of middle powers if Carney and some other leaders could put that together.
Yeah, the saying, what's that saying, that the horse has bolted? Nick, I'm wondering, when you hear the President Trump's Board of Peace announcement, that's exactly the kind of new world order, dramatic world order of business being flagged by Carney that we can expect going forward?
So I think the Board of Peace is exactly the sort of thing that would be a rallying cry for these middle powers, the ones that believe in the UN system and international relations. I think it was maybe on your list, but I would imagine a country like Brazil, there is no way on earth they would want to join the Board of Peace. That's a country that's really a true believer in international law, in the UN system. So that Brazil would be, I think, quite an obvious member of Carney's broader movement. I'd say that's the preference for international law if Carney and other middle powers can pull it off, it could be very attractive, I think, to a much broader swathe of states who are small powers in the world, who actually rely on international law, rely on open trade. It could be very attractive to them because it's the best way of securing some of their interests.
All right. Exciting times. And thank you so much, Nick Redman, Editor-in-Chief, Director of Analysis at Dow Jones Oxford Analytica, weighing in.